as a manager, how do you make sure that your team is asking the right questions? Well, that can start with making sure that they know it's okay to ask questions. In this video, we'll talk about that. The things that your team may be thinking that you don't realize, and how to proactively talk to your team. Not just to ask questions, but how to do it. Now, the background of this video is that recently I was speaking at a conference, and between sessions, I was talking to someone who's a recent college graduate, just taken on their first corporate job. And I was asking, like, how are you liking it? And they're like, well, it's good, but they're like, the one thing I think about is working with other people, asking questions just feels so embarrassing. I said, what do you mean? And I said, well, if I don't know something, I just think to myself, okay, should I know this? Has somebody told me this? And then I have this whole thing of who do I ask? Who can I ask? And are they going to tell other people I asked this? And are they going to think I'm dumb for asking? Or is it going to sound dumb when I say it? Or am I going to make a mistake when I learn what they tell me? All of these questions. But overall, it just feels so embarrassing to actually ask questions. And I said, well, you know what? It's really important information to hear. And it's why I talk a lot to managers, leaders about proactively talking to their teams about exactly this. She's like, what do you mean, that questions are embarrassing? I said, no, but I actually probably will make this an upcoming video. I've talked about this otherwise, but that recognizing there's so many things in your team's mind that as a manager, it can help to give those levels of reassurance, but also give a sense of things like questions, who to ask, what to ask, all of those. And so this week, that's what I'm talking about. Because one thing that's helpful is whether you have new career team members or experienced team members, knowing that as a manager, no matter what your role is, whether you're a first-line leader or a senior executive, there are power dynamics. And so when it comes to things like, I don't know something, I'm going to ask a question, even if you feel confident doing so, the team members that report to you or that report to them, if you have a broader team, they often have this fear of not wanting to screw up, not wanting to make mistakes. And how that can end out in the workplace is that they have all these things that they want to know, but they don't ask. And so people may be working and winging it. They have incomplete information. Or they spend so much time swirling about how to ask and what do I do, when they could have just gotten through it really quickly and been a lot more productive. And so recognizing that power dynamic is really important. Even if you're one of those managers that says, my door's always open, I'm always here, that can be true until everyone's trying to get your attention at once. Or people think, I know they say that, but do they really mean it? Because people do so often worry about making one mistake, and then that could lead to them losing their job entirely or being embarrassed in front of their teams. And so as a manager, one of the things that can be really helpful is to talk about this, both in team meetings and one-on-one. And whether you have broad team meetings where you're sitting in an office, virtual, or whether you have on your feet environments, maybe a pre-shift, post-shift huddle, sometimes it's asking those questions and not just saying, it's good to ask questions. You should ask questions. That can be helpful, and it's better than saying nothing at all. But sometimes it's going a step further and really putting your feet in the shoes of your team members and recognizing that and thinking, okay, if I felt nervous to ask a question at work, what are ways that my boss, my manager, my leader could say things to make me feel more comfortable actually doing it? But then also know what kind of questions to ask. And so generally in those team environments, it can be helpful to have a conversation point to, again, getting in their shoes, to say things like, as a team, one thing I want to say is if you ever have a question, I never want you to hold on to it because you're afraid, like, do I ask this? Who should I ask? Just knowing it's so much better to go ahead and ask the question. And that when you're the person who someone's asking, whether it's me or anybody else, remembering that when someone comes to ask you a question, you may have thoughts. You may be super busy and think, I don't have time right now. But just knowing the way that you hear that and respond to it, it's really important. If you don't have time right then, thinking, that's a good question. Let me get back to you, XYZ, because I have to focus on this and I want to give you my attention. Walking team members through that, because even if they're colleagues, a lot of times people may feel a lot more comfortable asking a coworker or a colleague. But also that colleague may not be watching videos or going through manager training like you are. And so just reminding colleagues of when someone asks you a question, remembering how important that is to listen to it and be able to respond to it. And if you're not the person to answer it, trying to help them figure out who might be. And so some of it is talking like that. Like it's okay and it's really important to ask questions. But then also one-on-one as well, talking with team members. Like if you do have someone who's newer to an organization, whether they're brand new in their career or they've been elsewhere, that can have a lot of challenges too, because someone may have joined your organization because they have, growth opportunities and they're excited about that. And that can feel really exciting until they realize once they've started with your team and your organization that they left a lot behind, meaning, reputational, they knew who to ask, they had all this information, and they knew if they asked a question, people, knew why they were asking, they had all that built up, and they feel like they're starting from scratch. So whether you have newer career team members or experienced team members with experience elsewhere, or even people who have been on your team, talking individually to those team members about what that's like. Because sometimes it's having that conversation in a team meeting. Again, whether that's a shift huddle, sitting around, but just talking about that and saying, asking questions. Have you ever felt like you're embarrassed to ask a question or held on to it because you don't want to end up looking silly? And what can happen, especially as a leader, still with that power dynamic, is if there are times when you felt that way, talking about that and saying, like, there's times, like if you have a question and saying, someone was using this term and I literally had no idea what it meant. But I didn't want to ask anybody because I thought everybody must know this. And so instead, I just pretended along and things like that. And over time, I finally figured it out when I could have asked someone for more context or questions like that. And it's important to be able to do that and never feel like you have to pretend just not to be embarrassed. And so having an example like that can help because as a leader, sometimes storytelling isn't some big fairy tale thing. It's just talking about really relatable emotions that your team members, especially those that aren't in management, may think, my manager knows it all, and so they may worry, I don't know if they've ever felt that way, meaning you. And so when you're able to talk to your team about how it's not just okay, but it's important to ask questions and also talk about a time that you did and what learned from that, but then follow up individually in one-on-one meetings and talk about that specifically. So whether you do have someone that's newer, whether newer to their career, to your organization, and saying, are there things that you're trying to figure out and you have questions, and do you have a good sense of who to ask and what? And then to other team members, even if they've been with you for a while, and saying, even if you've been here for a while, are there times that you have questions now but hold back because you feel like it's something that you should know, or maybe you'll learn, or you'll just figure it out? But asking in those ways. Every week, in addition to having this video, you may be watching it embedded in a blog, I do have a blog that talks about topics and gives tips and talking points. And so in that, I'll talk about different ways that you can have these conversations, both with your team and individual, no matter their role. But knowing the biggest takeaway might be in this video for you is that as a manager, your team members may have all of these questions, but their thought may be exactly the same as this recent graduate, which is, it just feels so embarrassing to ask questions. And so as you think about that, if you have team members that you think to yourself, well, they're asking questions all the time, maybe too many questions. Well, knowing, again, that means that they're inquisitive, but they may need some guidance on how to ask those questions as well. And so in the blog, I'll give some tips on how you can talk about how to ask questions. Because even if that seems so basic, it can feel really hard. It can feel hard to people starting out their career. It can feel hard to people that are working with an organization, or just those that think, I should feel comfortable asking this, but I don't really know if this is a question I should ask. So in the blog, you can find those tips as well. And just knowing, as a manager, the things that you can do to create more communication, even if they lead to more questions sooner on, often lead to a lot less later on, because people start to feel comfortable and confident. And so these investments in time and talking to your team and individual team members can mean so much, rather than this situation that there may be so much information and stress churning that you had no idea, and it's the last thing you want. So it can be important to be the first thing that you address.